This is open chain stitch, also known as square chain, and I have shown here two variations of the stitch. These two variations have squared off or open ends, and this variation has pointed ends. You can make this stitch with one end pointed and one end open, or whatever you like, depending on the shape that you need. So I'm going to first show you how to make it with pointed ends, because this is actually the easier variation. So I'll bring my needle and thread up, just as I would for a regular chain stitch. I'll loop my thread around to either side and hold it down with my thumb and go back in at the same point. Now for regular chain stitch, you would just come up right above that point. But for this open chain stitch, I'm going over to one side, either to the left or the right, it doesn't matter, and then loop my thread around the needle and start to pull through. But don't pull all the way through, otherwise you'll just have a straight stitch. Before I finish closing that loop, I'll place my needle back down inside the loop, and now here's the point, here's the left side. I'll go over on the right side and place my needle down and then close that loop. So now I have a triangle shape for the point. Then I'll come back up on the left side, or the right side, depending on which way you're doing it. I'll start to pull through, but before I finish pulling through, I'll go back down here on the right side and then close the loop. So let's do one more. I'll come up on the left side, loop the thread behind the needle, start to pull through. Before I finish pulling it through, I'll place my needle here and then close that loop around the needle. Now I'll make the pointed end. So here, instead of going over on the left side, I'll come up right in the middle. Loop my thread behind the needle, pull through, and then anchor that stitch just outside the loop. So that is an open chain with pointed ends. Now let's do one with squared off ends. Now you'll notice that for this stitch, you really need to use both hands. So you need two hands to do this stitch. 3 hands would be even better, but sadly that is not available. So now I'll bring my needle and thread up, go back down right across from where I came up, and then come back up right above that first point. And as I did for the last variation, I'll start to pull through, but before I close that loop, I'll place my needle down here right above this point. So you can see how this works. So this forms kind of a little ladder shape. And now I'll bring my needle back up here on the left side. So I'm coming up on the left side and then going back down on the right side. Now to end this stitch, it's a little bit trickier. I have brought my needle in there, but now I'm going to pull my needle out and just leave that loose. Then I'll anchor my stitch down on the right outside the loop. Now I have to come over here and pull that into shape. Put my needle back inside that loop. And now anchor that stitch down just outside the loop. So if you want to have additional little stitches here, you can just add your straight stitches. So I use open chain stitch whenever I want to make here's one time that I've used it for a leaf shape. I think it looks nice for plant shapes. I've used this on one of our scissor cases, and I have just put French knots in the center. Here's another place I've used it. Here I've used it for a seaweed on one of our fish. And again, I have notice I've made the pointed ends, and then I have put these French knots in the center. Now, here is a place where I have used the open chain stitch, and I've started with it open. So I have a squared off end. I came up here and then went down here. So these are my open chain stitches, and I curved them around and then finished by making a point at the tip of the seahorse's tail, and then I added these French knots.